Today on Just Curious, we're joined by Jordan Gurrieri, co-founder and CEO of BlueLabel, an award-winning team of AI technologists that use generative AI to unlock practical, transformative solutions and turn AI pilots into production-ready deployments. At BlueLabel, Jordan and his team help mid-market and enterprise leaders escape pilot purgatory and actually operationalize AI, especially in complex, regulated environments where off-the-shelf tools fall short. Jordan, welcome to Just Curious.
Thanks, Stu.
Who is Jordan Gurrieri? What is BlueLabel, and what problems are you seeking to solve?
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be here, Stu. Thanks for inviting me to this, have a chat with you. I'm the co-founder and CEO of BlueLabel, and we're a AI consulting and development partner, really focused on helping mid-market and enterprise companies. I started my career in technology over 20 years ago with Microsoft, and actually in a business process and automation in sales and marketing at the company. And you can imagine then, over 20 years ago, the tools we were using for automation paled in comparison to what we have today with the power of LLMs and other automation tools. Later in my career with Microsoft, I led product management with consumer products like Hotmail Messenger and SkyDrive. And about 14 years ago is when I started BlueLabel, coming out of Microsoft. And since then, my team has delivered over 300 successful digital products across various industries. And our focus has been today really in specializing to help companies bridge a gap between the plethora of AI pilots that are being done to identify use cases for generative AI and automation and help them move from that pilot stage to production ready deployments, and typically in those like complex use cases. That's a lot of places where AI initiatives tend to fail.
You mentioned some of your early experiences in automation. How does this experience shape how you think about AI today?
Yeah, I think my worldview of where AI today is just a natural like evolution of where we've come with how we interface with technology. And so, we started with like mainstream desktop system interfaces on desktops, and we had to be kind of taught how to learn how to take training to learn how to use these pieces of software. I think of like Word, Excel, these tools like that. And then we were introduced to mobile, and that's really when BlueLabel was born, in the mobile era. And mobile became, brought technology into more like simple contextual use of where we were. We had simpler applications that did one thing really well. And we were still interacting with screens and buttons. And where I see kind of AI going right now, and how we are, this evolution of AI and how we interface with technology is it's about like the user interface as we know it getting out of the way, with us interacting directly with technology in a more like conversational human way. It's like a team member alongside of us that we can interact with it in a natural conversational way and do the same kind of work we were used to interacting with screens and buttons in the background.
When clients call you, what's usually broken or bottlenecked?
Yeah, when clients call us, I think there's like a few areas that are typically what they're trying to kind of solve for. I talk about like moving from pilot to production. I'd say the majority of the clients are coming to us when they're at a stage where they've been running various pilots internally to identify like what are real ROI driving use cases for AI in their core workflows, or how they interact with their customers. And it's great that you need to run those pilots, those experiments, to kind of see where ROI can be derived. But the true ROI comes from when you can scale that validated use case across a whole organization. A lot of times these pilots fall apart when, you have a team of like 5 or more that need to use that same solution in a consistent, reliable, safe way, secure way. And that's where, we help organizations kind of go from these validated pilots to production ready deployments, where teams of anywhere from as little as 5 people to 500 people can use that system reliably on a day-to-day basis, and how that company delivers its goods and services to its customers.
What are the most common traps you see leaders fall into when trying to scale AI? Like what does what does the gap look like between, the pilot and the sort of value creation at scale? Like what are the common reasons, I guess, the common traps and the common reasons that people can't get from pilot to scale?
Yeah. I think one of the most common reasons is a lot of the pilots start as just like individual productivity use cases. So they're starting from experiments that people are doing on their own. How they can make their own personal day job more efficient. And that's great. Like that adds a lot of efficiency and productivity to the organization when kind of everybody's doing it, but then there's a cohesiveness. So when an organization has identified that there's this use case that someone in a department is doing and it's proven to be valuable for their day, where that gap is or where that falls apart is okay. How do they create a system around that so everybody in the organization can do it? It's not a technology problem; it's a change management problem, right? Change manage scale. So, I think one of the other places where a mindset shift needs to happen, where organizations are coming in or realizing they've kind of have a challenge or a gap, is they're thinking of AI as another software project, like buying software, buying another piece of technology, or deploying another piece of technology. Whereas AI, it's artificial intelligence. It's intelligence that sits alongside us and works with us with our teams. That's a change management problem. So when they shift their mindset to, hey, we have to, think about AI solutions as a change management initiative, then we can kind of shape the right mindset for deploying AI at scale, not just deploying AI at individual use.
Can you share a little bit more about like what that process looks like? I'm a potential client. I've run a pilot. We're seeing for a handful of folks, this is sort of checking the boxes, and now we want to scale it across our marketing function or some business unit. What does the process look like to go from identifying that we need to do something different to scale it to actually having it like operationalized and utilized by the people that are need it to solve their problems?
Yeah, there's a few like steps in the process. I think we need to see the kind of who's been involved in the pilot. So we want to start with making sure that we continue a little bit of the validation by expanding the scope of the pilot to include other people who are at the core of doing or interacting with that core workflow. We say they're like who's feeling the most pain of this, that this pilot, that this use case is resolving, pain for. So we'll want to start by kind of doing some process mapping of the end-to-end process in which these particular use cases are being utilized, and identify what pain point are they solving for, who else is feeling that pain point, how many people are there. So we want to start to then take the pilot and systematically scale it to more and more people in the organization, but not all of them. And the way that looks is it could start with just kind of taking what's already been built and seeing, can we work with that, or do we need to build it in a more repeatable system? So as an example, what that looks like is there's a lot of pilots that are run as, built as like maybe custom GPTs or agents in Copilot or something like that. And that works well for individuals, but when you have, another person log on, go into their instance of ChatGPT, run that custom GPT, they tend to get slightly different results. And then when they try to do the same process again through a few days later, you get a slightly different result. If we see things like that, then we have to start to kind of see, can we take the essence of the pilot of what's being done in that custom GPT and rebuild it at the API layer? So that might be another step that we do. The other thing about what we need to look for is how it's integrated with other systems that the individuals are interacting with. Are there other legacy tools or internal systems that need to be integrated, and how those are integrated with? So will kind of go through these steps of it's a bit of like I said, the change management, bringing more of the people who would be interacting with that into and testing and validating with them to see where the implementation has inconsistencies when multiple people are trying to do the same thing with it. And then we also have to look at that at a technology layer. How do we scale the implementation at the technology layer so it's consistent? You get a consistent result every time. You get more accuracy out of the result. The cost is scalable, right? A lot of pilot implementations are cheap for the pilot, but if you just scale that, it's going to get really expensive very fast. So how do we look at cost efficiency areas to reduce costs when you move from one user to hundreds of users of that same use case?
Awesome. We're going to walk through an example of like what that looks like with a case study you shared, but maybe ahead of that, just a few more questions about your own experiences in this market. You've mentioned that AI for productivity is helpful, but it's not a competitive advantage. Why isn't that the case? And if it's not, like what is?
Yeah. Yeah, what I mean by that is like, don't get me wrong. AI, when I say AI for personal use, is how we're all using AI, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, or whatever our frontier model of choice is excellent for personal productivity. And organizations that are adopting kind of an AI first mindset are definitely going to have an advantage than others. But what I mean by the personal use of AI is that it's becoming table stakes. We're kind of all aware and all using it in our own way. And so one of the things that doesn't, there's kind of friction created when everybody's using it a different way and there isn't a consistency. But what I believe is a true competitive advantage at the organizational level is more about moving from like individual use cases to like agentic systems, agentic use cases, where AI is built in at the organizational level. And agents are running operations and workflows alongside humans at the organizational level. That's a competitive advantage is because the multiplier effect of the individual efficiency gained is great, but at an organizational level, like the multiplier effect is much larger. It's a big impact across the whole organization. It allows you to produce more with less resources overall. The other competitive advantage of that is when you're ingrained AI in an agentic way, like agentic systems in your organization, it's harder to replicate. Your competitors of companies that it's hard to build and invest in that. Whereas individual use cases of using large language models as personal productivity assistants is kind of what everybody is doing. And if we're sharing prompts and whatnot, it's easy to kind of get that same level of individual efficiency, but it's a lot harder from a competitive advantage to replicate creating your kind of how you deliver your products and services as an organization with an agentic layer built into it.
Yeah. Cool. Let's walk through a case study. You mentioned a telecom project to me. What problem did they come to you with? And let's use that as a springboard to discuss how you solved it.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, I brought up so this is like a regional telecommunications company. They're a fiber-based internet service provider based on the East Coast. They had a 10-person back office dispatch team. That dispatch team was a costly bottleneck to just their customer service. Most organizations in that ISP space have this as well. What was the core issue was their technicians in the field they would have to call into the dispatch office, the back office there, for equipment health checks when they were on site at a residential or commercial location to validate the completion of the job, that the equipment was back up and running, was working, like if a modem was down or something like that, and then close out the work order. You can imagine, like, we've all experienced this maybe in our own home when Comcast comes by or whoever it might be, that they're doing they're fixing an outage and at your home, and you see them kind of sitting in their truck waiting there, not wondering what are they doing, what are they working on. Well, they're waiting to get validation from the back office that the system health checks have all run and it's all connected and working, right? That downtime is costly for that organization and for the customer experience. It's like if this person did 15 minutes of work but is sitting around for another 30 to 45 waiting to be able to leave and go to the next site, what's going on there from a customer service perspective. So they wanted to tackle that issue, right, with AI. Given that these are smart connected devices, like what could we be doing in an automated way in the background to make that interaction of validating work orders and closing them out more automated, and not just automation, but like how do we also support the technicians in the field? Because the other things technicians need to do is call into the dispatch for troubleshooting, to help looking up troubleshooting issues and whatnot, which we created a customer. So the way we solved this, I should maybe get into that, is kind of two ways. There were two solutions initially developed. One was a voice-enabled AI assistant for the field technicians that automated much of the not automated, sorry, it kind of gave them a natural language assistant for troubleshooting issues of the hardware in the field. Things if they were stuck or they were maybe a newer technician and they didn't have as much experience, we need to typically call back into experts in the dispatch office to help with. And then the second tool was an automated dispatch workflow. It would triage all the issues that came in each day. It would prioritize them. It would do some mapping of where individuals would go, and then using that AI assistant, they could validate, run a couple commands to check if the system's hardware was back up and running, do the health checks, complete and close out the work order. And this various kind of agentic system would tick off through that process and go through all the steps to close out the work order and give them the release to be able to move on to the next.
We talked about change management earlier. How do you make sure the system was trusted and then actually used by these employees?
Yeah, so very early on, what we did is brought in some of the field technicians, some of the more experienced field technicians, to ensure that we kind of studied and did some process mapping on like how do they do, what does this look like when they're doing this in the field, and what do the calls look like and sound like when they're calling into dispatch to get either support or to be able to close out a work order. So how that helps with the change management is we're making the people who are going to be interacting with this new way of working with their virtual dispatch office part of the solution of developing what that looks like, right? By just kind of having them interact and studying how they do it right now, and also not changing too much. So part of the change management is the organization had several third party tools, some of them legacy tools provided by third parties that they needed to integrate with. And so we want to ensure that we're not fundamentally changing too much about how the technician does the job they need to do in the field, but we're kind of supplementing it with this AI experience. So that was critical to bring the dispatchers and the technicians' feedback in to the system itself, allowing the system to learn and improve by their feedback directly in to the chat agents.
And I can imagine the benefits for the telecom once you were able to like implement this were, I guess, one, sitting around, but two, maybe you don't need as many people in the dispatch center. Tell us a little bit about what benefits accrued to the telecom from having pursued this project.
Yeah, so they were able to reduce the back office in size from the number of employees in the back office doing this work. There's a benefit of the cost savings of that for sure, and they were able to save I think upwards of 10,000 monthly, like per person that they were employing in the back office. But also, you can imagine that in some of the, and this is also common in other industries that we see, is some of these roles are difficult to maintain, to keep filled. It takes a while to train people up in them. They perform in these roles and then they move on. So there's kind of a lot of churn sometimes in these roles where senior people may stay on for a long time, but it's hard to fill the role and maintain staff there regularly. So there's a lot of cost savings and not having to deal with that churn. The other thing is the downtime, right? So reducing the downtime for field technicians. If they went from spending 30 minutes to an hour on site, then a field technician can only do about 5 site visits per day, giving travel time. And now, if they can go on site and spend 15 to 30 minutes, cut their time in half, they can do upwards. It's not a you know, perfect math, but they could do maybe 75 or double 75% more visits per day, right, on site, which with less technicians. So this started with about 5 technicians, as I said, in terms of starting with the design of it, and eventually was rolled out to 150 technicians in the field.
Wow. It also sounds like it was a very fast process. You launched 2 pilots and 4 sprints. Tell us a little bit about how you move so quickly while still validating the design.
Yeah. Yeah, so the in 4 weeks, what we had, the client, like I mentioned, they had come to us. This was one of those examples where they had done the piloting internally. They had built a custom GPT that demonstrated the 2 use cases, that they could use AI, a large language model, to provide a technician support in the field, and that they could use some of the API capabilities in a custom GPT to connect with some of their systems to do some of the automation for closing out and managing work orders. Um, the 4 weeks, what they had realized though were the gaps that come with trying to roll that out to 180. It wasn't ready. It wasn't consistent. There were a lot of errors. There were a lot of not high in the accuracy, but it proved that it was possible. What we did in 4 weeks was rebuilt the pilot at the API layer with OpenAI using the agents API, so that now we can more directly connect with the company's backend systems and drastically improve the quality and consistency of what the pilot's objective was. So in that first 4 weeks, we were able to re-architect the custom GPT on now a more scalable foundation to be able to now start bridging the rest of the gap so that this would be ready to go to 150 technicians. So we've been working with them for several months now, probably close to a year actually. And we had several rollouts. We can imagine a few months later or a few weeks later, we rolled out another update because the pilot only solved for one specific use case. One of the most common
Okay.
use cases, one of the most common issues that field technicians would be sent out for. What we needed to do for it to be rolled up to all the technicians is to be able to resolve 80% of use cases, the long tail use cases, the more complex use cases for on-site visits as well. That's what I mean about the big gap between the pilot and going to full production is training the AI to be able to support the technicians in the field on all the use cases that they have to solve for in their troubleshooting and whatnot.
Yeah. Anything this project taught you that could be applied to other AI deployments? Any learnings?
Yeah, I think the definitely the finding the workflow fit from day one, which the company did a great job kind of identifying that this was a huge bottleneck that people were calling in to the back office, on a regular basis throughout the days, and there's got to be steps in that can be that we can leverage AI to help with being in an always available, always on, assistant that all the technicians could be calling at the same time. I think the other thing, the other learning is definitely bringing in and making some, very tenured field technicians part of the process that helps with the change management adoption. They're able to share in the real world what the interaction looks like and needs to feel like. And then it also helps the other technicians, the other people in the organization who are going to be adopting this have and kind of the buy-in, the champion that someone that lives and breathes their day-to-day work has been a part of developing the solution.
Yeah. You mentioned workflow fit, and you've said before it's kind of the key to AI adoption. Can you give me an example of what workflow? I mean, maybe you just did, but what's great workflow fit? And also, is there like a process that one can undertake to identify which workflows offer the greatest potential for fit?
Yeah, yeah, it is. So the key there is like not trying to automate everything, especially all at once, right? If you think of the whole process, sometimes we think about, hey, we can apply AI everywhere here. And that is true. We could probably, between automation and other AI solutions, automate the whole workflow from soup to nuts. That instead, we need to identify, one high friction sub step or part of the workflow and start there. And we may find several, right? In this case, it was the dispatch bottlenecks. What's important or kind of the steps to do that is first is kind of process mapping, right? So map out inwards in pictures. We do this via we call them stakeholder interviews. We interview a technician for over an hour or more on what does their day look like. Walk us through every step of the workflow. What tools are you using? Who's involved? How much time are you taking on each step? What resources do you use to help you? Documentation, data, things like that. So we map that out in a very visual way, and then we start to look at places where do we see a lot of pain? Where did we hear a lot of comments from that interview that felt like pain, frustration, disinterest, things like that, that say, hey, there's a point of friction there. And then we look at that step and say, is there something there that we could apply AI to, either in a conversational interface or in some form of automation, right? Or the combination of both is most powerful. Uh, and so, once we do that, then we'll probably identify a few areas. And so we do some rapid experiments in each of in maybe 2 to 3 areas to identify where is there a viable fit. And then we start kind of when we get that validation through feedback loops with, again, the people who are feeling the pain that are doing the process, then we scale that solution and maybe start working on one of the other places that we identified that there's pain and friction and there's a potential use case there to validate.
And when it comes to that AI fit, is it a function of a repetitive task? Is it a function of kind of information being ingested and synthesized or distributed? What makes for a good AI fit?
Definitely, if there's a repetitive task that is data or knowledge heavy, where that knowledge and data is available or documented, that's a good fit. There's also good fits in places where tribal knowledge is relied on a lot. It makes the process a little bit harder because it means that the knowledge and the data isn't store isn't already readily available somewhere. And so we have to do a little bit more interviewing and recording of that. But areas where a workflow relies a lot on tribal knowledge is also a great place to think about applying AI. How do we capture that tribal knowledge, immortalize it in like a conversational agent so it's available to everybody, right? And it can be instantly indexed, it can be instantly accessed. Those are some areas where or things to look for when identifying use cases. The other most important thing I would say though is also to start with like business as strategic alignment first. What are the business's objectives? Where does a business want to go as a business, irrespective of AI? And then understand what workflows are critical to perform well, efficiently, consistently every time for that business objective to be achieved. Then, because we could apply this technology everywhere and anywhere, it's kind of an unbound capability. But if we align it to where the business wants to go, then that's where we also kind of get large alignment to impact and ROI. So identifying just core workflows that are critical to achieving business objectives and starting to map those out and pick those apart and look for those areas where there's friction, repetitiveness, delay, where people are just starting something and waiting for someone else to pick up a task before it could move to the next step. And, areas where where the process relies on tribal knowledge, which is a risky thing for business scalability.
Yeah. What's one myth about AI implementation that you wish you could bust?
Hmm. Interesting question. Myth about AI implementation. I wish I could. I think that it's about how realistic it is. How would I frame this? Uh, if I were to start a new company today, I'd definitely make it AI first, right? Like that start with AI. How do I create processes that are AI driven, AI led, automated, and whatnot? I think there's a myth that AI can be applied and transform all processes from soup to nuts in one fell swoop in an existing business. So that's what I was trying to say there is I think that in existing businesses, we have to treat this as change management, small steps at a time. I don't think it's a myth though that in starting a brand new business, especially a small business or technology or product one, that you could go AI first and AI forward, and grow a business with AI driven processes. I think that's very true. Not so much a myth, but I think it's more of a myth in the case at which kind of AI can replace processes in an existing business that has a bit of a legacy and a system already behind it.
Yeah. The myth in legacy businesses is that it's magic, that you snap your fingers and everything is solved. And like the reality is that you probably can radically transform the business over time, but it'll take time. It's not just a technology thing, it's a people thing. And that is not a snapping the fingers exercise.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said, Stu. That's exactly it. It's very quick to get to that. Like we call it the 40% GPT trap. That wow. Of, oh my goodness, yeah, I can AI my whole process because I just did this in a few hours. But then you're rolling it out to the whole company. It's gonna take weeks to months still. It definitely is.
Who's a good fit for Blue Label, whether it's an industry, a size, or like a persona within these companies? Who should reach out to you if they're interested in going from pilot to scale, if they're curious about how they can transform their organizations?
Yeah. Yeah, our ideal customer are middle market companies to large enterprises. We're talking companies that are, say, around 200 million in revenue and up, or have several hundred to several thousand people in the team. These are enterprises that are people and process intensive. Often organizations or industries. We work across industries, but where complex solutions are needed are often in areas where there's highly regulated industries or complex industries where they have very nuanced processes. We do work across industries like healthcare, financial services, real estate, logistics, manufacturing, technology companies. And typically we're working with operational leaders, COOs, CFOs, chiefs of staff, teams like that, and CIOs and CTOs as well, that are responsible for integrating AI into their existing systems and workflows.
As we come to a close, maybe a piece of advice. For leaders who feel pressure to do AI but don't know where to start, what should they do?
Yeah. I think our piece of advice is always to start small, target like narrow, friction workflows, but places that are critical to your organization's success or the way your organization delivers, whether it's products or services to its customers. Start there, start small, build fast, test and experiment, and then identify and design for scale. I'd also say then second is just as important as, like, don't treat AI initiatives like traditional software initiatives. We need a mindset shift. We need to think of AI initiatives like change management initiatives, where people and process are going to be the greater hurdles than the technical hurdles. The technology's there, the technology is great, but we got to think about the change management aspect of it for it to take hold and to really truly realize ROI from those investments.
Awesome. Jordan, I really appreciate you taking time to chat with me today.
Absolutely, Stu. Yeah, thanks for having me again.